This is James P. White from 95.7 Cruise FM, The Locker Room. Welcome to the Jedi Jimmy podcast. This is episode number 59. This is Ahsoka, episode 4, called The Fallen Jedi. Now, I have some assumptions on who they are talking about as the Fallen Jedi. It could be Sabine, because you'll find out in a minute. It could be Ahsoka, and it actually could be Anakin Skywalker. Just wait. Okay, so this episode actually starts with Sabine and Huang trying to fix the ship. Ahsoka says if they can't make the journey to find Ezra, then no one should, meaning that they need to stop them from finding Grand Admiral Thrawn. It's better to leave him stranded than to have Thrawn return as heir to the Empire. Next, the HK droids actually find the ship and are ready to attack. Ahsoka actually, there's a lot of conversation between Ahsoka and Sabine throughout this episode. Ahsoka goes, "Can I count on you?" Sabine says, "You know you can." And also they are discussing the turmoil within Sabine and the fact that she really wants to find Ezra, who they've been trying to find from when he disappeared years ago at the same time as Thrawn. Now, Baylan seems to be very apprehensive on killing Ahsoka, or even going after Ahsoka. But now, it also in a conversation with Sabine and Hera, actually, not Hera, Ahsoka, they say sometimes we have to do what is right regardless of our personal feelings. Now, the HK droids attack Huang, Ahsoka, and Sabine. Huang is actually somewhat damaged. But now we go back to Home 1, where there's Hera and, her son Jason on the Ghost. And she actually leaves Home 1 without permission from the council. And she is joined by Carson Teva. He is the fighter pilot that we see in The Mandalorian Season 1 and 2. And a bunch of X-Wings actually join them. And they call themselves the Phoenix Squadron, and Hera is the Phoenix leader from back in the Rebel days. Now, as I said before, Baylan, there's still a lot of internal struggle that he's dealing with the fact that he used to be a Jedi. And Morgan Elsbeth says to him, "Have faith." Baylan says, "I lost that a long time ago." Now, Ahsoka and Sabine are actually confronted by Merrick and Shin, but this time Sabine goes into full Mandalorian mode. She is both using her lightsaber and her Mandalorian blasters, something she is the most comfortable with. Now, when you think about it, throughout the time of the Jedi after the Old Republic, Jedis were known to use both blasters and lightsabers. Luke Skywalker did, Ezra Bridger did, and even a few throughout time after that. It was very well known that way. And if you remember, during the Revenge of the Sith, how did Obi-Wan kill General Grievous? But with a blaster. Now, one thing about the fight with Ahsoka, and she's done this throughout the entire episode, is she is fighting her lightsabered opponents, so Merrick at this point and Baylan later on, with only using one lightsaber. So she usually uses two, so I find that very, very unique, I guess. And when Merrick started spinning his lightsaber, because as you may know, the Inquisitor's lightsaber, they can hold the hilt and the two blades spin kind of like a saw. But Ahsoka, using one very fancy technique, was able to kill him with one strike. It was a very similar technique that was used by Obi-Wan Kenobi when he finally actually defeated Darth Maul on the planet Tatooine. Now, when Mark was killed, a green mist came out of him. So what that means is I was wrong. He is not Star Killer, but he was actually an agent of the Night Sisters, possessed by the Night Sisters as essence or ghost, which I thought was kind of cool. Now, because the same thing kind of happened when Darth Sidious killed Darth Maul's brother, Savage Opress, during the Clone Wars. And when he was killed, the same essence came out of him. So now, at this point, Ahsoka went after the map, and Sabine continued fighting Shin. Now, Morgan Elsbeth has now returned to the ship, asking Baylan to protect the map so that they can calculate the trajectory to where they're going to find Grand Admiral Thrawn. Now, when Ahsoka confronted Baylan, he said, Anakin Skywalker spoke highly of you. So if you don't know, Anakin Skywalker was her master. Now, Baylan then said everyone in the Order knew Anakin Skywalker. And some knew who he had become, Darth Vader. And asked her why she abandoned Anakin. Because Anakin did believe that he was abandoned by Ahsoka. But if you don't know what happened, she was accused by the Jedi Council of being a terrorist, and she ended up was proved that she had nothing to do with the incident at the Jedi Temple. Again, this is during the Clone Wars. So because she felt that the Jedi Order had lost their way, they're no longer the Jedi Order of old. They are basically being manipulated and run by the Chancellor, who we find out later is a Dark Lord of the Sith. So she left the Jedi Order and did not return. Quote from Baylan says that Thrawn speaks to a greater truth. One must destroy in order to create. That's the way of the Sith. They end up fighting. She again uses a single blade instead of fighting with her two lightsabers. But she is focused on Form 5, which was a style that she learned from her master, who was an expert at Form 5, so that's Anakin Skywalker. Now, when Sabine was fighting with Shin, she ended up dropping her lightsaber, and she made it look like she was trying to use the Force by sticking her hand out. And she was called out by Shin by not having power. But then she used her wrist gauntlet and shot Shin's lightsaber out of her hand. Shin actually escaped using some kind of smoke bomb. Now, during the fight, Ahsoka ends up pulling... so I'm jumping all over the place because we're in two different scenes here. Ahsoka ends up pulling the map out of the reader, out of the device. But when she saw Shin, she was afraid that she assumed that something had happened to Sabine. She knocked out Shin using the Force. Baylan ended up fighting and knocking Ahsoka off the cliff. And then what happens is Baylan is messing with Sabine's feelings because she wants to destroy the map, and he's trying to talk her out of it because of her feelings towards Ezra and trying to find him. Now, she gives him the map. They end up finding a route to Grand Admiral Thrawn. And then Baylan ends up destroying the map sphere because they didn't need it anymore, so no one could follow. As Hera and the squadron do attack the ship. Morgan Elsbeth does activate the hyperdrive, which basically forces them to go right through the fighters. Some of the X-Wings were destroyed, but the Ghost and a couple of others survived. Now, this part is kind of interesting. Jason, who is the son of Hera, said, "I have a bad feeling." And his dad used to say that a lot, and he's a Jedi. So that's kind of hinting at the fact that he's Force sensitive. Now, Ahsoka survived the fall, but kind of. She woke up in the time nexus in the Rebels. So that's where actually Ezra was able to save Ahsoka years ago. He accessed it through a Jedi temple. So she then hears a very familiar voice. And he says, "Snips, I'm here." Snips was her nickname that she had by Anakin Skywalker. And they show him, her former master, and they end there. I have a feeling that this isn't a Force ghost. This isn't him resurrected. It's him, or the image of him in the time nexus, to help her on her path to stopping Grand Admiral Thrawn. Now, there's a few things I missed in the previous episode, one of which is Thrawn's Star Destroyer, which they're heading to, is called the Chimera, which should be which the Eye of Sion should be big enough to join with the Eye of Sion, which is basically a hyperspace ring. And Marek, when he was killed, the green mist coming out of him, I thought he was Starkiller, but he's actually a member of the Night Sisters. People ask me questions from time to time. I'm asked about things about Star Wars, the series, the movies, because I do this podcast. And the question I was most recently asked is kind of intriguing. Which one of the Star Wars live action shows can they watch and understand only having watched the movies, not watching any of the animated series or the previous shows before them? So my ranking of easiest to hardest, easiest to understand to the ones that might be a little more difficult. The easiest for sure is Mandalorian Season 1 and 2. The Book of Boba Fett Season 1, definitely easy to understand. There is some nerd stuff in there, but still understandable. Andor, 100% you can understand that if you watched Rogue One. Now, Obi-Wan Kenobi is a little iffy on understanding it because of the Inquisitors, so that might make it a little challenging. And probably the hardest one to understand, if you haven't seen the other stuff, especially the Rebels and Clone Wars series, would be Ahsoka. That's just my guess on that because I've seen them all. Now I have some predictions. One thing I predict that might happen, and I'm not sure it's going to be proven in this series, but I think Jason Syndulla actually ends up going to Luke's Jedi Temple, and he either is killed or becomes a knight of the Knights of Ren when Ben Solo turns on Luke and ends up destroying the temple. So I'm kind of hoping it doesn't happen that way. But if it doesn't, he could be the one piloting the Ghost in the battle at the end of Rise of Skywalker. So there could be the possibility that it's him there rather than him going to the Jedi Temple. I'm just hoping. Now, with the appearance of Anakin, as I said, he is not alive or a Force ghost. It's just him in this nexus in time. So I'm really not sure where they're going with this. I just hope that they're actually going to do this in a way to allow Ahsoka to prevail. And I do have a feeling that Ahsoka will actually end up dying by the end of this series, because her voice is one of the voices that Rey hears in Rise of Skywalker. And remember in Force Awakens, the Jedi had disappeared. So Ahsoka isn't around during that time. Now, some of my favorite quotes throughout the episodes so far. In episode 1, Morgan Elsbeth, luck has nothing to do with it. Fate has decided our next move. Ahsoka, sometimes the right reasons have the wrong consequences. And in episode 3, this was also by Ahsoka, anger and frustration are quick to give power, but they also unbalance you. And some of my favorite quotes from this episode is Huang says, one thing he says is, he said to Ahsoka and Sabine, stay together. You're always better that way. And Baylan said to Ahsoka, your legacy is like your master's, is one of death and destruction. This series is going so great. It's awesome. I really am quite enjoying it. I do need to thank you so much for joining me for this podcast. I look forward to seeing you next time as I deal with episode number 5. I do need to thank my sponsors, of course. I do need to thank my buddy Army Chris for helping me get this stuff set up. And, of course, Crier Media, where you can find my podcast and many others. I look forward to seeing you next week, and may the Force be with you always.